Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have serious philosophical disagreements with many of the judicial nominees put forward by the administration, but I believe Mr. Menashi is especially unfit to serve on the federal bench. His record indicates an inability to serve as a fair and impartial judge, and so I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to reject his nomination to a lifetime appointment on the bench. Steven Menashi's public record demonstrates a deep contempt for a wide spectrum of Americans, and particularly some of the most vulnerable amongst us. In his own writings and as editor-in-chief of the Dartmouth Review, he has directly expressed or condoned disturbing views on issues such as LGBT rights, racism, and student aid. Even if we were to cast these sentiments aside, Mr. Menashi's recent work in the Trump administration provides ample evidence that he is unfit for a lifetime appointment to the bench. Consider his performance as acting general counsel at the Department of Education. Mr. Menashi oversaw the rollback of regulations designed to protect students and taxpayers from predatory for-profit institutions of higher education. More egregiously, Mr. Menashi wrote the memo outlining the administration's scheme to provide only partial debt relief to students defrauded by for-profit colleges, a scheme that a federal judge ruled violated federal privacy laws. Under this scheme, the Department of Education used data that was collected to hold institutions accountable for providing education leading to gainful employment to further punish their victims. The department has still failed to comply with the court's orders, resulting in the Secretary of Education being held in contempt. Mr. Menashi supervised the legal work on the administration's proposal to rewrite the rules dealing with sexual assault and sexual harassment on college campuses. The administration's own analysis concluded that the new rules would dramatically reduce the number of sexual assault investigations. Mr. Menashi worked on the rule rolling back efforts to address disparities in the discipline of students of color and those with disabilities. In March, a federal court ruled that the department had engaged in an illegal delay and had acted arbitrarily and capriciously. During Mr. Menashi's time at the Department of Education, the administration argued that it was appropriate to use federal education funds to purchase guns for school. Also consider Mr. Menashi's time as a White House counsel, where he helped Stephen Miller in crafting some of the administration's most draconian immigration policies. While he was an advisor, the White House cut refugee admissions to a historic low, effectively banned asylum for refugees traveling through Mexico, and threatened to end birthright citizenship. His views and work experience call into question how his personal biases would color his rulings and whether he has the judicial temperament and political independence necessary to serve on the federal bench. This is not the kind of legal judgment that deserves a lifetime appointment to the federal judiciary. And while the Senate has spent considerable time and hours on Mr. Menashi's nomination, one can't help but notice the fact that the majority leader seems to scrupulously avoid calling up votes on legislation that would help working Americans and working families. I hear from my Rhode Island constituents every day about countless pressing issues that the Senate should be debating and voting on. We could be considering an infrastructure bill that would provide robust investment to enable the rebuilding of our crumbling roads, bridges, schools, and other critical infrastructure. We could be working to increase Pell Grants and lower the cost of college. I think every member of this body would agree that another vital issue that we hear often from our constituents about is the need to address skyrocketing prescription drug costs. According to Families USA, nearly 3 in 10 American adults, nearly 80 million people, have not taken required medicine due to its cost. In fact, addressing prescription drug costs alone would go a long way towards bringing down health costs overall. There are dozens of proposals from senators on both sides of the aisle to help address this issue, yet Republican leadership has refused to allow any debate on prescription drug prices or health care costs more broadly this year. Sometime I and many of my colleagues have proposed numerous times that Medicare would be required to negotiate drug prices with the drug companies to ensure seniors and taxpayers are getting the best price. The Department of Veterans Affairs already does this. While there is no silver bullet in solving rising drug costs, this would be a common sense first step in the right direction. There are also more than 250 bills passed by the House that Majority Leader McConnell refuses to bring up and has been left in the legislative graveyard. Let me repeat that. More than 250 bills are awaiting action here in the Senate. The House is doing its part to look after the people's business, and the Senate should follow suit. These include the Enhanced Background Checks Act, which would expand the National Firearms Background Check System to include virtually all gun transfers and block illegal sales that currently happen through gun shows and private transfers. They include the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, which is the primary law to provide services for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. They include the American Dream and Promise Act to provide a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, TPS holders, and those with DED, that's Deferred Enforced Departure. Furthermore, Republicans continue to block Democratic-led efforts to pass common-sense election security legislation. This is despite warning after warning from our intelligence and national security agencies that Russia undertook an unprecedented effort to interfere with our 2016 elections, and that the Russians are actively working to do it again in 2020. Instead of elevating someone with an extreme record like Mr. Menashi to one of the highest courts in the land, we should be debating and voting on legislation that will protect health care, expand educational opportunity, secure our elections, fully fund the census, and prevent gun and domestic violence, in addition to many, many other important topics. The majority has refused to allow the Senate to vote on and address the pressing issues that Americans care about, and this body is failing to get its appropriations work done on time. So I urge the Majority Leader to end this partisan paralysis and let the Senate get to work on issues that can improve the lives of Rhode Islanders and all Americans. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor, and I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.